What I'm about to tell you happened 8 years ago, but the campsite we found last week. It looked like they had just stepped away for water. The coffee was still there. The wedding rings were still warm. This is the story that made me question everything I thought I knew about the wilderness, about love, about how people can just vanish. Before we dive into this mystery, understand that what you're about to hear will challenge everything you believe about the possible and impossible. My name is Detective Sarah Mitchell, and I've been investigating missing persons cases in the Rocky Mountain region for over 15 years. I've walked through abandoned campsites where tents flapped like funeral shrouds in the wind. I found hikers' bones scattered by predators across alpine meadows. I've delivered news to families that no parent, spouse, or sibling should ever have to hear. I thought I had seen every way the wilderness could claim a human life, every manner in which people could simply cease to exist in the vast emptiness of the American West. I was wrong. The case I'm about to share with you began on a Tuesday morning in September 2015, when a missing persons report landed on my desk like any other. 2 names typed on standard paperwork: David Michael Thornton, age 26, and Emma Catherine Thornton, née Walsh, age 24. Newlyweds, last seen leaving Boulder, Colorado for their honeymoon in Wyoming's Wind River Range. Due back September 22nd. Today was September 25th. At the time, it seemed routine. The mountains claim dozens of people every year, and most of those cases follow predictable patterns. Inexperienced hikers venture beyond their abilities. Weather turns deadly without warning. Equipment fails at crucial moments. Someone makes a single bad decision, and the wilderness swallows them whole. These tragedies are heartbreaking but comprehensible. They follow the laws of physics, biology, and common sense. The Thornton case would follow none of these laws, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning, with 2 young people so deeply in love that everyone who met them couldn't help but smile. David and Emma Thornton were the kind of couple that restored your faith in human connection, the kind that made you believe in soulmates and happily ever after, even if you'd spent 15 years investigating the darker corners of human nature. David Michael Thornton stood 6 feet 2 inches tall, with the lean, wiry build of someone who spent more time hanging from rock faces than sitting behind desks. His brown hair was perpetually tousled, and his beard grew in patches that Emma lovingly called distinguished ruggedness. He worked as a freelance photographer, specializing in outdoor adventure shoots for magazines like Outside, National Geographic Adventure, and Rock and Ice. His portfolio was stunning, images that captured not just the beauty of the wilderness, but the raw emotion of human beings challenging themselves against impossible odds. David had grown up in Fort Collins, Colorado, the son of 2 geology professors who introduced him to the mountains before he could properly walk. By age 10, he was scrambling up Class 3 peaks with his parents. By 15, he was leading technical rock climbs that would intimidate most adults. Photography came later, during his junior year at Colorado State University, when he realized he could combine his passion for the outdoors with his growing artistic vision. He wasn't interested in landscape photography. The mountains had been photographed to death. Instead, he focused on capturing the human experience of wild places, the moments of triumph, terror, and transcendence that defined adventure. His photographs told stories: a climber's face during a lightning storm on Long's Peak, fear and exhilaration warring in her expression; a father teaching his daughter to tie knots at their first climbing camp, patience and pride evident in every gesture; a rescue team carrying an injured hiker down a treacherous trail, their faces showing the weight of responsibility for another human life. David had an uncanny ability to be in exactly the right place, at exactly the right moment, capturing images that revealed fundamental truths about courage, vulnerability, and the relationship between humans and the natural world. Emma Catherine Walsh was everything David wasn't, and somehow everything he needed. Where he was tall and angular, she was petite and graceful, barely 5 feet 4 inches, but possessing a presence that filled whatever room she entered. Her auburn hair caught light like burnished copper, and her green eyes held depths that seemed to reflect whatever landscape surrounded her. She taught 3rd grade at Boulder Elementary, and anyone who spent 5 minutes watching her work understood that teaching wasn't just her profession, it was her calling. Emma had discovered climbing by accident during her senior year at the University of Colorado. A friend dragged her to the campus recreation center's climbing wall, and something about the vertical challenge spoke to a part of her she hadn't known existed. Within a year, she was spending every weekend in places like El Dorado Canyon and the Flatirons, pushing herself up increasingly difficult routes with a determination that surprised everyone who knew her mild-mannered classroom persona. Her students loved her not just because she was kind and patient, but because she brought a sense of adventure into everything she taught. When they studied geology, she brought in rock samples from her climbing trips and told stories about where each one had been found. When they read about different cultures, she shared photographs from her climbing trips to places like Joshua Tree and Red Rocks, showing them how diverse and beautiful their own country was. Her classroom walls were covered with maps marked with pins showing all the places she had climbed, and her students were constantly asking when she would add new pins. David and Emma met at a climbing gym in Boulder on a rainy Thursday evening in March 2014. David was there photographing a competition for a local outdoor magazine, and Emma was practicing for a weekend trip to the Black Canyon of the Gunnison. He noticed her not because she was the strongest climber in the gym, but because of the way she approached each route, with careful study, methodical preparation, and complete focus. She moved up the wall like she was solving a 3-dimensional puzzle, never rushing, never fighting the rock, always thinking 3 moves ahead. During a break between climbs, David asked if he could photograph her working a particularly challenging route. Emma was initially hesitant. She didn't consider herself photogenic, and certainly didn't think her climbing was worth documenting. But something about David's quiet confidence and genuine enthusiasm convinced her to agree. The photographs he took that evening captured something Emma had never seen in herself, a fierce concentration and natural grace that transformed her from an elementary school teacher into something approaching an athlete. They spent 2 hours talking after the gym closed, sitting in David's Jeep in the parking lot as rain drummed on the roof. Emma told him about her plans for the Black Canyon trip, and David shared stories from his recent assignment, photographing ice climbing in Ouray. They discovered they had both grown up in Colorado but had never crossed paths before. They had both chosen careers that let them spend significant time outdoors. They both believed that wilderness experiences revealed fundamental truths about human character that couldn't be discovered any other way. Their first official date was a climbing trip to El Dorado Canyon the following weekend. David brought his camera, but he spent more time watching Emma climb than photographing her. She had a natural intuition for reading rock, finding holds and sequences that more experienced climbers might miss. More importantly, she climbed with joy, celebrating each successful move like a small victory, never getting frustrated when she couldn't complete a route on her first attempt. Emma, for her part, was fascinated by David's ability to see photographic opportunities in moments that seemed completely ordinary to everyone else. While she was focused on the technical challenge of moving up the rock, David was noticing how afternoon light created shadows that emphasized the texture of sandstone, or how a climber's expression changed in the moment they committed to a particularly exposed move. He taught her to see their shared passion from a completely different perspective, to notice the artistry inherent in what they were doing. They were inseparable within a month. Emma started planning her climbing trips around David's photography assignments, and David began choosing projects based on whether they would take him to places Emma wanted to explore. Their friends joked that they had become a single entity with 4 arms and 2 rope systems. But the truth was more profound than that. They had found in each other not just romantic love, but a perfect climbing partner. Someone whose strengths complemented their weaknesses, whose passion for the mountains matched their own. The proposal, or rather proposals, happened on a stunning October morning in 2014 at Garden of the Gods near Colorado Springs. They had climbed to the top of one of the red sandstone formations to watch the sunrise paint the surrounding landscape in shades of gold and crimson. They were sitting side by side, still connected by their climbing rope, sharing coffee from a thermos and planning their next adventure, when they simultaneously reached into their packs and pulled out small jewelry boxes. The moment was so perfectly synchronized that they both started laughing before either could say a word. David had been carrying the ring for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment and the right place. Emma had bought her ring 3 days earlier, after lying awake one night realizing that she couldn't imagine a future that didn't include David in every significant moment. They proposed to each other simultaneously, both speaking the same words at the same time. "Will you marry me?" Their wedding was held the following August at a small outdoor venue in the foothills west of Boulder. The ceremony took place on a natural rock platform overlooking the Continental Divide, with about 50 family members and friends in attendance. Emma wore a simple white dress that would have looked equally appropriate for a casual dinner or a formal ceremony. David wore a navy blue shirt and khaki pants, his one concession to formality being a tie that Emma had chosen specifically because it matched the color of Alpine lakes. The most memorable moment of the ceremony came when they exchanged vows they had written themselves. Emma spoke about how David had taught her to see beauty in places she had never thought to look, and how he had shown her that love was like climbing. It required trust, communication, and the willingness to support your partner even when you couldn't see the route ahead. David talked about how Emma had taught him that the most important photographs weren't the ones that captured dramatic moments, but the ones that revealed quiet truths about human connection and the courage required to build a life with another person. Their wedding reception was held at a local brewery where the beer was cold, the music was loud, and the dancing went well past midnight. But David and Emma slipped away around 10 o'clock, changing into hiking clothes and driving to a nearby trailhead for a moonlight walk to a small alpine lake. They wanted to start their marriage the way they planned to continue it, alone together in the wilderness, sharing the kind of adventure that had brought them together in the first place. For their honeymoon, they considered dozens of possibilities. Emma lobbied for a climbing trip to Joshua Tree, where the warm desert sun and endless granite formations would provide perfect conditions for both climbing and photography. David suggested the Bugaboos in British Columbia, where towering granite spires offered some of the most spectacular alpine climbing in North America. They researched options in Utah, California, and even considered a more traditional tropical honeymoon. But in the end, they chose Mount Hooker in Wyoming's Wind River Range, a decision that would haunt everyone who knew them for years to come. Mount Hooker wasn't the most famous peak in the Wind Rivers. That distinction belonged to Gannett Peak, Wyoming's highest summit. It wasn't the most technically challenging. Peaks like Pingora and Wolf's Head offered more demanding routes. But Mount Hooker had something that appealed to both David and Emma, a reputation for solitude and wildness that promised the kind of honeymoon experience they craved. Mount Hooker stands 1,256 feet above sea level, a massive granite pyramid that dominates the western edge of the Wind River Range. The peak was named after Sir Joseph Dalton Hooker, a British botanist and explorer who never actually set foot in Wyoming, but who had contributed significantly to the scientific understanding of alpine ecosystems. The mountain's western approach, which David and Emma planned to attempt, required approximately 15 miles of hiking through increasingly challenging terrain, followed by at least 2 days of technical rock climbing to reach the summit. The route they chose was described in climbing guidebooks as serious and committing, requiring advanced technical skills, complete self-sufficiency, and the ability to retreat quickly if weather conditions deteriorated. The approach began at Worthen Meadow Reservoir, following a trail that quickly disappeared into trackless wilderness. From there, climbers had to navigate by map and compass through dense forests, across numerous stream crossings, and over several high passes before reaching the base of Mount Hooker's western face. The climbing itself was rated 5.7, which meant it required advanced technique but wasn't at the absolute limit of difficulty for experienced climbers like David and Emma. However, the route's serious rating came not from technical difficulty, but from commitment and exposure. Once climbers began the multi-day ascent, retreat became increasingly difficult due to the nature of the terrain. Weather could change rapidly at high altitude, turning a manageable climb into a life-threatening situation within hours. Emergency rescue, if needed, would be extremely difficult and time-consuming due to the remote location and technical nature of the terrain. These factors didn't concern David and Emma. Both were experienced multi-day climbers who had completed numerous technical ascents throughout Colorado and Utah. They were comfortable with exposure, confident in their ability to read weather patterns, and experienced in the kind of self-reliance that serious mountain climbing demands. Their gear was meticulously chosen and well-maintained. Their physical conditioning was excellent. Their relationship was strong enough to handle the stress and communication challenges that multi-day climbing inevitably creates. Most importantly, they were deeply excited about the adventure ahead. Emma's journal, recovered later from their Boulder apartment, contained numerous entries about their Mount Hooker preparations. She wrote about studying topographic maps by candlelight, about testing gear combinations for maximum efficiency, about researching the history of previous ascents and learning from other climbers' experiences. Her final entry, dated September 14, 2015, simply read, "Tomorrow we leave for our real honeymoon. I can't wait to see what we discover up there." David spent the weeks before their departure organizing his camera equipment and researching the photographic opportunities Mount Hooker might offer. He packed 3 camera bodies, multiple lenses, extra batteries, and enough memory cards to document their entire adventure. His plan was to create a comprehensive photographic record of their honeymoon climb, with the ultimate goal of producing a magazine article about the experience. Several outdoor publications had already expressed interest in the story, particularly because David's reputation for capturing authentic emotional moments made him perfect for documenting such a personal adventure. They left Boulder on the morning of September 15, 2015, driving David's 2010 Jeep Cherokee, loaded with enough equipment for 7 days of wilderness travel. The Jeep was well suited for the rough access roads that led to remote trailheads, and David had modified it with a roof rack system that could accommodate their climbing gear, camping equipment, and photography supplies. Emma had taken the entire week off from teaching, arranging for a substitute teacher, and preparing detailed lesson plans to ensure her students wouldn't miss a beat during her absence. The drive to Wyoming took most of the day, with stops for gas, food, and last-minute gear checks. They spent the night at a motel in Pinedale, Wyoming, wanting to get an early start on their approach hike the following morning. Emma called her sister Lisa from the motel room, a conversation that Lisa would replay in her mind thousands of times over the following years. "We're so excited, Lisa," Emma had said, her voice bubbling with enthusiasm. "The weather forecast is perfect, our gear is dialed, and David has been studying the route obsessively. This is going to be the adventure of a lifetime." Lisa, who was not a climber and had always worried about Emma's increasingly ambitious mountain adventures, expressed the usual concerns about safety and communication. Emma reassured her that they had filed a detailed trip plan with the ranger station, that they carried emergency communication equipment, and that they had enough supplies to wait out any weather problems that might arise. "Don't worry about us," Emma had said. "We know what we're doing. and we're going to take care of each other up there. I'll call you as soon as we get back to civilization." Those were the last words Lisa ever heard her sister speak. The next morning, September 16th, David and Emma drove to the Pinedale Ranger Station to register for their backcountry permit and get final weather and route information. Ranger Tom Hutchins, a 20-year veteran of the Wind River Range who had personally climbed most of the major peaks in the area, later described the couple as exceptionally well-prepared and realistic about the challenges they were undertaking. Hutchins reviewed their planned route in detail, pointing out potential hazards and escape routes on the topographic maps. He confirmed that weather conditions were favorable for the next 5 days, with clear skies predicted and only a slight chance of afternoon thunderstorms. He also provided information about recent climbing activity in the area, mentioning that no other parties were currently attempting Mount Hooker, which meant David and Emma would have the mountain entirely to themselves. Before leaving the ranger station, David and Emma purchased some additional rope and extra fuel for their camp stove. They also spent time chatting with Hutchins about photography opportunities, with David showing the ranger examples of his work and asking about specific locations where lighting conditions might be particularly favorable. Emma discussed the educational aspects of their adventure, mentioning her plans to share stories and photographs with her students when she returned to teach. Hutchins later told investigators that David and Emma seemed excited but not overconfident, experienced but not complacent. They asked intelligent questions about route conditions and weather patterns. They demonstrated familiarity with their equipment and realistic expectations about the time required for different aspects of their climb. Most importantly, they seemed completely comfortable with each other's abilities and completely committed to making conservative decisions if conditions deteriorated. They were exactly the kind of climbers you want to see in the backcountry, Hutchins told me during one of our interviews. Skilled, prepared and humble about the challenges they were facing. If I had to guess which climbing parties would have problems and which wouldn't, David and Emma would have been at the very bottom of my worry list. From the ranger station, David and Emma drove approximately 30 miles on progressively rougher roads to reach the Worthen Meadow Reservoir trailhead, the starting point for their approach to Mount Hooker. The trailhead was essentially a small parking area carved out of the forest, with space for perhaps a dozen vehicles and a simple wooden sign marking the beginning of several different backcountry routes. When they arrived around noon on September 16th, theirs was the only vehicle in the parking area. They spent an hour organizing their packs, distributing weight evenly between them and making final adjustments to their equipment. David's pack contained most of their shared gear, tent, stove, first aid kit, plus his camera equipment. Emma carried most of their food and her personal climbing gear. Both packs were heavy, probably close to 50 pounds each, but manageable for experienced backpackers planning a multi-day wilderness adventure. Their planned itinerary was straightforward and conservative. Day 1 would be a relatively easy 8-mile hike to establish their first campsite near Marms Lake, allowing them to adjust to the altitude and settle into the rhythm of wilderness travel. Day 2 would involve a more challenging 10-mile approach through increasingly rugged terrain to reach the base of Mount Hooker's western face, where they would establish their base camp. Day 3 would be a rest day, allowing them to scout their climbing route and prepare for the technical ascent. Days 4 and 5 would be spent on the actual climb, establishing a high camp partway up the face and then making a summit attempt. Days 6 and 7 would be used for the return journey, with flexibility built in to account for weather delays or other unexpected circumstances. This was exactly the kind of conservative, well-planned approach that experienced mountaineers recommend for serious climbs in remote areas. They had built extra time into their schedule to account for problems. They carried more food and fuel than they expected to need. They had multiple backup plans for different scenarios. Every aspect of their preparation suggested that David and Emma understood the risks they were undertaking and had taken appropriate precautions. According to the logbook they left on their dashboard, as required by backcountry regulations, they began hiking at 1:30 p.m. on September 16th. The trail initially followed a well-marked path through dense lodgepole pine forest, gaining elevation gradually as it wound its way deeper into the Wind River Range. This section of the approach was considered easy hiking, suitable for anyone with basic wilderness experience and reasonable physical fitness. For the first few miles, the trail remained clearly defined and easy to follow. David and Emma would have made good time through this section, stopping occasionally to admire views of distant peaks and to photograph interesting features along the route. Emma's journal entries from previous climbing trips suggested that she loved these early miles of an approach, when the excitement of beginning a new adventure was balanced by the rhythm of walking and the gradual transition from civilization to wilderness. As they gained elevation and moved deeper into the backcountry, the trail became fainter and more challenging to follow. This was intentional. The Forest Service maintained minimal trail markings in wilderness areas to preserve the sense of solitude and self-reliance that serious backpackers sought. Navigation began to require map and compass skills, and route finding became an increasingly important part of the journey. By evening of September 16th, David and Emma should have reached their planned first campsite near Malms Lake, approximately 8 miles from the trailhead. This was a beautiful location, with clear water for drinking and cooking, established camping areas that showed minimal environmental impact, and stunning views of the peaks they would attempt to climb over the following days. Previous climbers had described it as an ideal place to spend a first night, allowing time to adjust to the altitude and enjoy the transition into wilderness. We know they reached this campsite because of a photograph found later on David's camera, time-stamped 7:23 p.m. on September 16th. The image shows Emma setting up their tent beside the lake, with Mount Hooker visible in the background, its granite face catching the last light of day. Emma is smiling at the camera, clearly happy and relaxed, showing no signs of fatigue or concern. The photograph captures exactly the kind of moment David was known for, a perfect intersection of human emotion and natural beauty. Day 2 of their approach, September 17th, would have been significantly more challenging. The route from Malms Lake to the base of Mount Hooker's western face involved approximately 10 miles of increasingly difficult terrain, including several steep climbs, multiple stream crossings, and navigation through areas where no trail existed at all. This was the kind of wilderness travel that separated experienced mountaineers from casual hikers, demanding constant attention to route finding, careful management of energy and resources, and the ability to make good decisions in challenging terrain. The photographs on David's camera show that they made steady progress through this challenging section. Images time-stamped throughout September 17th show both climbers crossing streams, scrambling over boulder fields, and navigating through dense forest. Emma appears in several photographs, always smiling, always appearing comfortable and confident despite the increasing difficulty of the terrain. David's composition and timing remain excellent throughout these images, suggesting that he was managing the physical challenges of the approach while maintaining his artistic vision. The final photograph from September 17th shows their base camp, established exactly where their trip plan indicated it would be. The image, time-stamped 6:45 p.m., shows a perfect campsite on a small ledge, perhaps 100 feet above a mountain lake, with Mount Hooker's imposing western face rising directly behind their tent. The composition is stunning, their small, colorful tent providing human scale against the massive granite wall they plan to climb. Emma can be seen in the background, organizing equipment near their camp stove, preparing for what would be their last documented evening together. September 18th was planned as a rest day, allowing David and Emma to scout their climbing route, organize their technical gear, and prepare mentally for the multi-day ascent ahead. This kind of preparation day is standard practice for serious mountaineering objectives, providing time to identify potential problems before committing to the technical climbing portion of the adventure. The photographs from this day show both climbers studying the western face through binoculars, pointing out features on the route and discussing strategy. David's images capture Emma in various moments of preparation, sorting climbing hardware, checking the condition of their ropes, studying route descriptions in their guidebook. These are intimate photographs, showing a side of mountain climbing that most people never see, the careful, methodical preparation that precedes every successful ascent. The most revealing photograph from September 18th shows Emma cooking dinner at their base camp, with the western face of Mount Hooker towering behind her. She is laughing at something David has said, her face lit by the warm glow of their camp stove, completely relaxed and happy. The timestamp reads 6:47 p.m. This would be the last photograph ever taken of Emma Catherine Thornton. According to their detailed climbing plan, September 19th was designated as the first day of their technical ascent. They planned to begin climbing at dawn, carrying minimal equipment to establish a high camp approximately halfway up the western face. This high camp would serve as their base for a summit attempt the following day, and as a staging area for their eventual descent. This type of multi-day technical climbing requires careful coordination and communication between partners. Every piece of equipment must be essential. Every decision must be made jointly. The margin for error becomes smaller with each pitch climbed, and the consequences of mistakes become increasingly severe. But David and Emma were experienced in this type of climbing, having completed similar ascents throughout Colorado and Utah. What happened next remains one of the most baffling mysteries in the history of American mountaineering. On September 22nd, when David and Emma failed to return to the Worthen Meadow Reservoir trailhead as planned, their absence initially caused no concern. Weather in the high mountains can change rapidly, forcing climbers to wait out storms or extend their trips by a day or two. Emma's sister Lisa called David's cell phone several times but reached only voicemail, which was entirely normal in the Wind River Range, where cell coverage was sporadic at best. By September 24th, when Emma failed to return to work and David missed a scheduled photography assignment, Lisa knew something was seriously wrong. Emma was not the type of person to miss work without calling, and David was meticulous about keeping professional commitments. Lisa immediately drove from Boulder to Wyoming, stopping first at the Pinedale Ranger Station to report her concerns. Ranger Tom Hutchins took Lisa's concerns seriously, particularly given David and Emma's detailed trip plan and their reputation for conservative decision-making. He organized an initial search effort that same afternoon, focusing on the standard approach route to Mount Hooker and the climbing route they had planned to attempt. The first search teams found David and Emma's Jeep Cherokee exactly where it was supposed to be, locked and undisturbed at the Worthen Meadow Reservoir trailhead. Inside the vehicle, everything appeared normal. Their detailed climbing plan was still displayed on the dashboard, as required by backcountry regulations. A small cooler contained the food they had planned to eat after returning from their climb. David's camera bags, emptied of the equipment he had taken on the mountain, sat neatly organized in the back of the Jeep. Nothing suggested any kind of emergency or hasty departure. The initial ground search team followed David and Emma's planned route toward Mount Hooker, moving as quickly as possible, given the challenging terrain and the urgency of the situation. Search and rescue operations in the Wind River Range are complicated by the vast distances involved, the technical nature of much of the terrain, and the limited number of personnel available for such operations. Even with local volunteers and specialized equipment, searching the thousands of square miles of wilderness where David and Emma might have traveled would require weeks or months of intensive effort. The first breakthrough came on September 26th, when searchers found clear evidence that David and Emma had reached their planned first campsite near Malms Lake. The site showed signs of recent use, a small fire ring with cold ashes, tent impressions in the soft ground beside the lake, and food scraps that had been properly buried according to leave-no-trace principles. Most importantly, several members of the search team confirmed that this campsite matched the location and setup shown in the photograph found later on David's camera. This discovery was both encouraging and puzzling. It proved that David and Emma had successfully completed the first day of their approach and had established camp according to their plan. The condition of the campsite suggested that they had stayed only one night before continuing toward Mount Hooker, which matched their itinerary exactly, but it also meant that they had disappeared somewhere along the more challenging second day of their approach, in terrain that would be much more difficult to search effectively. Search efforts intensified over the following days, with additional personnel brought in from Colorado and Utah. Helicopter overflights provided aerial reconnaissance of the vast area where David and Emma might have traveled, while ground teams methodically searched the most likely routes between Malms Lake and Mount Hooker's western face. Search dogs were brought in to follow scent trails, though the passage of time and changing weather conditions made this increasingly difficult. The search teams were comprised of some of the most experienced wilderness rescue personnel in the Rocky Mountain region. These were people who had found lost climbers in seemingly impossible locations, who understood how to read terrain and weather patterns, who could think like mountaineers and anticipate the decisions that David and Emma might have made in various circumstances. If anyone could locate the missing couple, these searchers could. But despite covering hundreds of square miles of wilderness, despite flying countless helicopter hours, despite following every possible route that David and Emma might have taken, the search teams found no further trace of the couple. No abandoned equipment, no distress signals, no signs of struggle or accident. It was as if David and Emma had simply vanished somewhere between their first campsite and their planned base camp, leaving behind no evidence of their passage through some of the most challenging terrain in North America. The official search and rescue operation continued for 3 weeks, making it one of the longest and most intensive efforts in Wind River Range history. Volunteers came from throughout the Rocky Mountain climbing community, donating their time, expertise, and personal resources to help locate David and Emma. Local businesses provided food and equipment for search teams. The media attention brought additional resources and personnel, though it also created logistical challenges for coordinating the increasingly complex operation. Lisa Thornton became the unofficial coordinator for the family's involvement in the search effort. She took leave from her job in Denver and essentially moved to Pinedale, Wyoming, for the duration of the operation. Every morning, she met with search coordinators to review the previous day's efforts and plan new areas to explore. Every evening, she called David and Emma's parents with updates, no matter how minimal or discouraging those updates might be. The psychological toll on everyone involved was enormous. Search and rescue personnel are accustomed to difficult operations, but the complete absence of any trace of David and Emma was unlike anything most of them had encountered. Typically, missing persons cases in mountain environments leave some kind of evidence, abandoned equipment, distress signals, or at minimum some indication of the direction the missing persons had traveled. The Thornton case offered none of these clues. Emma's parents, Robert and Margaret Walsh, flew to Wyoming from their home in Michigan as soon as they learned about the disappearance. Robert, a retired automotive engineer, approached the search with methodical precision, studying topographic maps and weather patterns, trying to apply logical analysis to an increasingly illogical situation. Margaret, a retired nurse, focused on supporting Lisa and managing communication with the extended family and Emma's colleagues at Boulder Elementary. David's parents, Professor James Thornton and Dr. Linda Thornton, both geology faculty at Colorado State University, brought their scientific expertise to bear on the search effort. They understood mountain environments intimately and were able to provide insights about terrain conditions, weather patterns, and the kinds of geological hazards that might have affected David and Emma's route. Their professional network also provided access to additional resources, including graduate students who volunteered their time and expertise to help with the search. But even with all this expertise, all these resources, all this desperate human energy focused on finding two missing people, the search yielded nothing. By mid-October, when early winter storms began dumping snow throughout the Wind River Range, the official search and rescue operation was suspended until the following spring. The decision to suspend the search was agonizing for everyone involved, but it was also unavoidable. Winter conditions in the Wind River Range are severe, with temperatures dropping well below zero and snowfall measured in feet rather than inches. Search operations become not only ineffective but dangerous, risking additional lives without reasonable hope of success. The families understood this logic, but understanding didn't make the decision any easier to accept. Lisa Thornton refused to give up. Throughout the winter of 2015-2016, she used every available resource to learn technical climbing and wilderness survival skills. She took courses in alpine rescue, wilderness first aid, and technical mountaineering. She studied every available map of the Wind River Range, memorizing terrain features and potential routes that David and Emma might have taken. Her goal was to return to Wyoming the following summer as a competent searcher rather than just a concerned family member. When the snow melted in 2016, Lisa organized a private search effort that included several of David and Emma's climbing friends and a few professional guides who had volunteered their services. This group spent 2 weeks systematically searching areas that the official rescue operation had been unable to reach, focusing particularly on remote sections of Mount Hooker's western approach, where terrain conditions made helicopter reconnaissance impossible. The private search teams were smaller and more flexible than the official operation had been, able to spend days exploring single areas in detail rather than trying to cover vast territories quickly. They rappelled into ravines that had been inaccessible to previous searchers. They climbed to vantage points that provided new perspectives on potential route variations. They used their intimate knowledge of David and Emma's climbing abilities and decision-making processes to focus on areas where the couple was most likely to have traveled. But like the official search before it, the private effort yielded no new evidence, no equipment, no clothing, no human remains. No indication that David and Emma had ever passed through any of the areas being searched. The volunteers returned home discouraged and bewildered, unable to comprehend how two experienced climbers could disappear so completely in terrain that had been searched by dozens of experts. Over the following years, the Thornton case became something of a legend in the Rocky Mountain climbing community. It was discussed in climbing magazines, analyzed in online forums, and debated around campfires throughout the American West. Various theories emerged to explain the disappearance, each with passionate advocates and glaring weaknesses. Some suggested that David and Emma had fallen into a hidden crevasse or cave system, their bodies concealed in places where searchers couldn't possibly find them. But the Wind River Range's granite geology makes large crevasses unlikely, and the area had been thoroughly explored by cavers and climbers for decades without discovering any significant underground systems. Others proposed that the couple had been caught in an avalanche or rockfall, buried under tons of debris in a location that appeared completely natural to aerial reconnaissance. But September weather conditions made avalanches extremely unlikely, and the granite walls of Mount Hooker showed no evidence of recent rockfall significant enough to bury two people and all their equipment. A few conspiracy theorists suggested that David and Emma had deliberately disappeared, staging their own deaths to escape some unknown problem in their previous lives. But anyone who knew the couple dismissed this theory immediately. They had no debts, no legal troubles, no relationship problems. They were deeply in love, professionally successful, and completely integrated into their community. Most importantly, they would never have put their families through the agony of believing them dead if they were actually alive somewhere else. The most persistent theory among experienced mountaineers was that David and Emma had become lost during the second day of their approach, wandered into unfamiliar terrain, and died of exposure or accident in a location far from their planned route. This theory was supported by the known difficulty of navigation in the Wind River Range and the severe consequences that even small route-finding errors could create in such challenging terrain. But this theory also had significant weaknesses. David and Emma were experienced navigators who carried multiple maps, a compass, and GPS equipment. They had studied their route extensively and were familiar with the landmarks and terrain features that would guide their approach. Most importantly, if they had become lost and wandered off their planned route, they would almost certainly have left some trace of their passage. Footprints, abandoned equipment, or at minimum, some disturbance of the natural environment that trained searchers would have detected. As years passed without resolution, the Thornton case began to fade from public attention. The climbing magazines moved on to other stories. The online forums found new mysteries to debate. The search volunteers returned to their normal lives, carrying with them the haunting knowledge that two people they had desperately tried to save remained missing despite their best efforts. But the families never stopped searching. Every summer, Lisa Thornton returned to Wyoming for at least 2 weeks of private search efforts. She explored areas that had been searched before, hoping that changing conditions might reveal something previously hidden. She investigated new theories suggested by other climbers or researchers. She hiked hundreds of miles through some of the most remote wilderness in North America, driven by the desperate hope that she might find some trace of her sister. David's parents also made annual pilgrimages to the Wind River Range, though their approach was more scientific than Lisa's emotional quest. Professor James Thornton used his geological expertise to identify areas where terrain conditions might have contributed to an accident, while Dr. Linda Thornton analyzed weather patterns and climate data to understand how environmental factors might have affected David and Emma's route choices. Emma's students at Boulder Elementary, now several grades older, still asked about their missing teacher whenever Lisa visited the school. The garden dedicated to Emma's memory had grown into a beautiful space where children learned about plants and ecosystems, continuing Emma's tradition of using outdoor experiences to enhance education. But the children's questions about what had happened to Mrs. Thornton remained as unanswerable as ever. In 2018, 3 years after the disappearance, David and Emma were declared legally dead, a necessary legal formality that allowed their estates to be settled and their families to begin the complex process of moving forward with their lives. The declaration changed nothing about the ongoing search efforts, but it marked a psychological milestone that forced everyone involved to confront the reality that David and Emma were almost certainly not coming home. The legal proceedings revealed the depth of love and commitment that had characterized David and Emma's relationship. Their wills, written shortly after their wedding, left everything to each other and demonstrated their complete trust in each other's judgment and character. Their life insurance policies were modest, reflecting their young age and relatively simple financial circumstances, but adequate to help their families manage the costs associated with the ongoing search efforts. More poignantly, investigators found a letter that Emma had written to David but never given him, apparently intended as a surprise for their first wedding anniversary. The letter expressed her gratitude for finding someone who shared her passion for adventure and her deep love for the mountains that had brought them together. She wrote about her excitement for all the climbs they would attempt together, all the places they would explore, all the adventures that lay ahead of them. "I can't wait to grow old with you," Emma had written. sharing stories about all the mountains we climbed and all the beautiful places we discovered together. I want to be the old couple who still goes camping every weekend, who still gets excited about planning new adventures, who still holds hands while walking through the wilderness. The letter was found in Emma's jewelry box, sealed in an envelope marked, "For David, September 15th, 2016. She had planned to give it to him on their first anniversary, a day that would never come. By 2020, the Thornton case had largely faded from active investigation. It remained officially open, and any new evidence would be thoroughly investigated, but no detective was assigned to work the case full-time. The file sat in a cabinet in my office, one of several dozen unsolved missing persons cases that haunted the law enforcement community throughout the Rocky Mountain region. I had reviewed the file periodically over the years, always hoping that fresh eyes might spot something that previous investigators had missed. But the case seemed to defy rational analysis. Every piece of evidence was consistent with David and Emma having followed their planned route up to their first campsite, then vanishing completely during the second day of their approach. No subsequent search effort, no matter how thorough or well-funded, had found any trace of what happened next. The case might have remained forever unsolved, relegated to the growing list of mountain mysteries that challenge our understanding of how people can simply disappear in the wilderness. But sometimes the mountains choose their own timeline for revealing secrets, and Mount Hooker had been keeping a secret for 8 long years. On August 15th, 2023, a climbing guide named Marcus Chen was leading a technical climbing course on Mount Hooker's western face when his group made a discovery that would change everything we thought we knew about David and Emma Thornton's disappearance. Chen, an experienced guide with over 20 years of mountaineering experience throughout the American West, was teaching advanced multi-pitch climbing techniques to 3 clients who had hired him for a week-long intensive course. The group was approximately 800 feet up Mount Hooker's western face, working on a route that sees very little traffic due to its technical difficulty and remote location. Chen was setting up a belay station on a narrow ledge, demonstrating proper anchor construction techniques, when one of his clients pointed out something unusual wedged behind a large boulder at the back of the ledge. What they found defied every natural law that should govern wilderness environments. It was a complete campsite, meticulously organized and apparently recently abandoned, showing no signs of the 8 harsh Wyoming winters that should have obliterated any trace of human presence. 2 sleeping bags were laid out side by side, still zipped together as if their occupants had just gotten up for a morning stretch. A camp stove sat on a flat rock, with a pot containing what appeared to be freeze-dried coffee, mixed and ready to be heated. Personal belongings were arranged with the kind of careful organization that experienced backpackers develop over years of wilderness travel. A water filter, first aid kit, climbing hardware, and camera equipment occupied their designated spots around the small campsite. Everything was exactly where you would expect to find it in an active camp, as if the occupants had simply stepped away for a few minutes and would return at any moment. Marcus Chen, despite his extensive experience in mountain environments, knew immediately that something was fundamentally wrong with what they had discovered. He had found abandoned campsites before, usually scattered by wind and picked clean by animals within a single season. But this site looked preserved, as if it existed in some kind of temporal bubble that had protected it from the normal processes of decay and destruction that affect all organic materials in wilderness environments. Chen instructed his clients to avoid disturbing anything at the site and immediately radioed for emergency assistance. Within hours, a helicopter was ferrying investigators, including myself, to the narrow ledge where the impossible campsite waited to challenge everything we thought we understood about the natural world. My first glimpse of the site, as I rappelled down to the ledge from the helicopter, struck me with a sense of unreality that I struggle to describe even now. The campsite looked like a museum exhibit, perfectly preserved and arranged as if for display. But this wasn't a museum. This was a narrow granite ledge, 800 feet up a remote mountain face, exposed to 8 years of fierce winds, temperature extremes, and weather conditions that should have destroyed any trace of human presence within months. The sleeping bags showed no signs of ultraviolet damage despite being presumably exposed to thousands of hours of intense high-altitude sunlight. The fabric colors were vibrant and unfaded, the zippers functioned smoothly, and the insulation appeared to retain its full loft. More disturbing still, the sleeping bags felt warm to the touch, as if their occupants had just vacated them moments before our arrival. The coffee mixture in the pot was still brown rather than the bleached grey that organic matter becomes after prolonged exposure to mountain conditions. When I leaned closer to examine it, I could detect what seemed like a faint aroma of coffee, though logic insisted that any organic scents should have been eliminated years ago by wind and weather. Personal items scattered around the campsite included David's camera equipment, apparently in perfect working condition, despite 8 years of exposure to moisture and temperature fluctuations that should have destroyed the sensitive electronic components. Emma's climbing harness hung from a gear loop exactly where she would have placed it before going to sleep, the webbing showing no signs of deterioration from ultraviolet exposure or weather. But the most unsettling discovery was what we found inside the tent. 2 sets of clothing were laid out as if David and Emma had just changed and were planning to get dressed again in the morning. Emma's wedding ring was sitting on top of her folded shirt, and David's wedding ring was beside his hiking boots, exactly where you might place them before going to sleep in a tent. When I picked up Emma's ring to photograph it as evidence, I immediately had to set it down again. The metal was warm to the touch, noticeably warmer than the ambient air temperature on that cold mountain morning. In the high-altitude environment where we were working, with temperatures well below freezing even in late summer, there was no rational explanation for why that ring should have retained any heat whatsoever. David's ring exhibited the same impossible warmth. When I held both rings simultaneously, they felt as if they had just been removed from living fingers, as if their owners had placed them beside their clothes just moments before we arrived. The sensation was so unsettling that I found myself looking around the campsite, half expecting to see David and Emma returning from some morning errand. We spent 3 full days documenting every aspect of the campsite, photographing each item from multiple angles, and cataloguing everything according to standard crime scene procedures. The work was complicated by the exposed location and challenging working conditions, but it was essential to preserve every possible piece of evidence before disturbing the site. The most experienced crime scene investigators in Wyoming worked alongside us on that narrow ledge, and every single one of them was disturbed by what we found, or rather, by what we didn't find. There was no indication of struggle, no signs of violence or conflict, no evidence of sudden weather events, rockfall, or any other natural disaster that might have separated David and Emma from their belongings. The site looked exactly like what it purported to be, a peaceful campsite where 2 people had spent the night and then disappeared without taking any of their possessions. But the impossible preservation of organic materials, the warmth of metal objects that should have been frozen, and the complete absence of normal weathering effects suggested that this campsite existed outside the normal rules that govern physical reality. Nothing about what we found made sense according to our understanding of chemistry, physics, or biology. The forensic analysis of items recovered from the campsite raised more questions than it provided answers. DNA testing confirmed that the personal belongings did indeed belong to David and Emma Thornton, eliminating any possibility that we had stumbled upon someone else's campsite. But the preservation of organic materials defied scientific explanation. Laboratory analysis showed that coffee grounds, food scraps, and fabric items displayed characteristics consistent with having been frozen continuously for 8 years, despite being found at an elevation and in conditions where continuous freezing would be impossible during summer months. Even more puzzling, the items showed no signs of the freeze-thaw cycles that would be inevitable in a mountain environment where temperatures fluctuate above and below freezing on a daily basis throughout much of the year. Textile analysis of the sleeping bags and clothing revealed no deterioration from ultraviolet exposure, as if these items had been stored in complete darkness rather than exposed to intense, high-altitude sunlight for 8 years. Chemical analysis of the synthetic materials showed no breakdown of polymer chains, no color fading, and no reduction in tensile strength that would be expected after prolonged environmental exposure. The camera equipment presented perhaps the most baffling evidence of all. David's digital cameras were not only functional, but contained a complete photographic record of his and Emma's climb up Mount Hooker. The memory cards, which should have been corrupted by temperature fluctuations and moisture exposure, contained hundreds of images documenting every stage of their adventure from departure to their final evening together. The progression of photographs told a story of a completely normal, successful climbing adventure, David and Emma taking selfies at various points along their approach route. Emma leading difficult climbing pitches, while David documented her technique. Both climbers enjoying spectacular sunrise and sunset views from their various campsites. Nothing in any of these images suggested any awareness of danger or any reason for concern about their safety or success. The final photographs, taken on the evening of September 18, 2015, showed Emma preparing dinner, while David organized their gear for the technical climbing they planned to begin the following morning. These images captured a scene of domestic tranquility transplanted to a spectacular mountain setting. Emma appeared relaxed and happy, completely comfortable in the wilderness environment where she and David had spent so much of their relationship. The very last photograph on David's memory card, time-stamped 6:47 p.m. on September 18th, showed Emma raising a metal camping cup toward the camera as if making a toast. She was smiling with genuine joy, her eyes bright with the kind of happiness that comes from being exactly where you want to be, with exactly the person you want to share the experience with. The image was perfectly composed and exposed, demonstrating David's skill as a photographer, even in challenging mountain conditions. But this final photograph also presented a devastating mystery. According to our analysis of the campsite's location and the photographic evidence, David and Emma had established their base camp exactly where their climbing plan indicated they would. They had successfully completed the approach hike that had worried search and rescue teams for years. They were positioned perfectly to begin their technical ascent of Mount Hooker's western face. Yet somehow, despite being exactly where they were supposed to be, following their planned route precisely and showing no signs of distress or difficulty, David and Emma had never been found by the extensive search operations that had covered every accessible inch of Mount Hooker for weeks. How had dozens of experienced searchers, flying helicopter reconnaissance missions and conducting ground searches with trained dogs, failed to locate a campsite that was positioned exactly where the missing climbers' detailed plans indicated it would be? The question haunted every investigator who worked the case. We reviewed the records of the original search and rescue operation, interviewed the searchers who had participated, and studied aerial photographs taken during the helicopter reconnaissance flights. According to all available evidence, search teams had covered the area where we found the campsite multiple times using both aerial and ground-based search methods. But somehow, despite all these efforts, the campsite had remained invisible to the searchers until Marcus Chen stumbled upon it 8 years later. This seemed to violate basic principles of logic and physical reality. A campsite cannot exist and not exist simultaneously. It cannot be present in a location but invisible to trained searchers who examine that location specifically looking for exactly such evidence. The family's reaction to our discovery was a complex mixture of relief and renewed anguish. After 8 years of not knowing what had happened to David and Emma, they finally had confirmation that the couple had successfully reached their planned base camp and had spent at least one night there safely. The photographs showing Emma's happiness and David's continued artistic vision provided some comfort to people who had wondered for years whether their loved ones had suffered or experienced fear before their disappearance. But the discovery also raised new questions that were perhaps more disturbing than the original mystery. If David and Emma had reached their base camp safely and had been preparing for their summit attempt as planned, what had happened to them after David took that final photograph? Where were their bodies? How had their campsite remained perfectly preserved for 8 years while being invisible to extensive search efforts? Lisa Thornton's reaction was particularly heartbreaking. After 8 years of searching, of learning technical climbing skills, of exploring remote corners of the Wind River Range, hoping to find some trace of her sister, she finally had proof that Emma had been exactly where the family had always believed she would be. But this proof came with the devastating realization that Emma had been there all along, that the campsite had existed throughout all those years of desperate searching, somehow hidden from everyone who loved her and was trying to bring her home. "I must have been within 100 yards of that ledge," Lisa told me during one of our interviews. "In 2017, I spent 3 days searching that exact area. I remember looking up at that section of the western face and thinking that Emma and David might have climbed those routes. But I never saw the campsite. How is that possible? How could it have been there without me seeing it?" The question had no answer that made sense according to our understanding of physical reality, but the evidence was undeniable. The campsite had existed in that location for 8 years, perfectly preserved and positioned exactly where David and Emma's climbing plan indicated it would be. Yet it had remained invisible to dozens of searchers until Marcus Chen discovered it by pure chance. Emma's parents, Robert and Margaret Walsh, flew to Wyoming as soon as they learned about the discovery. They wanted to see the location where their daughter had spent her final documented night, to understand the environment where she had been happy and excited about the adventure ahead. Margaret, despite her fear of heights and complete inexperience with technical climbing, insisted on being helicoptered to the campsite so she could see where Emma had laid out her clothes and placed her wedding ring before going to sleep for the last time. Standing on that narrow ledge 800 feet above the valley floor, Margaret held her daughter's wedding ring and tried to comprehend the mystery that surrounded Emma's disappearance. The ring was still warm in her hands, 8 years after Emma had presumably removed it before sleeping. The impossibility of this warmth, the defiance of natural laws that it represented, seemed to symbolize everything about the case that challenged rational understanding. "She was happy here," Margaret said, looking around the campsite where every piece of equipment remained exactly as Emma had arranged it. "You can see it in the photographs, in the way she organized everything. She felt safe and excited about what they were going to do the next day." "So what happened? Where did she go?" David's parents brought their scientific training to bear on analyzing the evidence, but even their geological expertise couldn't explain the impossible preservation of the campsite. Professor James Thornton examined the granite ledge where the camp had been established, looking for any geological features that might create unusual microclimatic conditions. Dr. Linda Thornton analyzed weather data from the 8 years since David and Emma's disappearance, searching for patterns that might explain how organic materials could be preserved in an exposed mountain environment. But their analysis only deepened the mystery. The ledge where we found the campsite was completely exposed to prevailing winds and weather patterns. There were no geological features that would create a protective microclimate. Temperature and precipitation data for the area showed the kind of extreme seasonal variations that should have destroyed any organic materials within months of exposure. From a scientific standpoint, Professor Thornton told me, What you found up there is impossible. Organic materials cannot be preserved under those conditions for 8 years. Electronic equipment cannot function after that kind of environmental exposure. And objects cannot retain heat in a freezing environment without an ongoing heat source. Yet here we are, confronted with physical evidence that violates multiple natural laws simultaneously. The case attracted attention from researchers in various fields who were intrigued by the apparent violation of natural laws that the campsite represented. Physicists studied the temperature data, trying to understand how metal objects could remain warm in freezing conditions. Biologists examined the preserved organic materials, searching for explanations for their impossible state of preservation. Meteorologists analyzed weather patterns, looking for atmospheric conditions that might create the kind of protective environment necessary to preserve the campsite. But none of these experts could provide satisfactory explanations for what we had found. The evidence seemed to exist in defiance of multiple scientific disciplines simultaneously, challenging our understanding of chemistry, physics, biology, and meteorology all at once. The case also attracted attention from less scientific quarters. Paranormal investigators proposed theories involving supernatural intervention, suggesting that David and Emma had somehow been removed from normal reality, while their belongings remained behind as evidence of their presence. UFO enthusiasts suggested alien abduction, pointing to the impossible preservation of the campsite as evidence of otherworldly intervention. Time travel theorists proposed that David and Emma had somehow slipped into a temporal anomaly that displaced them from normal space-time while leaving their possessions behind. While these theories were scientifically unsupported, they reflected the desperation of people trying to make sense of evidence that defied rational explanation. When confronted with physical evidence that appears to violate natural laws, the human mind searches for any framework that might provide understanding, even if that framework requires accepting the existence of forces or phenomena that science cannot currently explain. The media attention surrounding the discovery brought the Thornton case back into public consciousness after years of obscurity. News outlets from around the world reported on the mysterious campsite and the impossible preservation of David and Emma's belongings. Documentary filmmakers requested access to crime scene evidence and interview subjects. True crime podcasters dissected every aspect of the case, proposing theories that ranged from plausible to bizarre. But the increased attention also brought complications. Curiosity seekers attempted to reach the campsite location, requiring rescue operations when they became stranded on technical terrain beyond their abilities. Conspiracy theorists accused law enforcement of covering up evidence of supernatural or extraterrestrial activity. Well-meaning volunteers offered to help with continued search efforts, not understanding that we still had no idea where to search for David and Emma themselves. The official investigation continued, but we had reached the limits of what conventional investigative techniques could accomplish. We had confirmed that David and Emma had reached their planned base camp safely. We had established that they had been there as recently as the evening of September 18, 2015. We had recovered their personal belongings in impossible condition and documented the violation of natural laws that the campsite represented. But we still had no idea what had happened to David and Emma after David took that final photograph of Emma toasting their adventure. We had no leads, no suspects, no rational explanation for their disappearance or for the impossible preservation of their belongings. The case had evolved from a missing persons investigation into something that challenged the fundamental assumptions underlying criminal investigation itself. As I write this account, more than a year after the discovery of the campsite, the official case file remains open. Any new evidence will be thoroughly investigated. Any credible theories will be explored. but I have come to accept that the Thornton case may represent one of those mysteries that human understanding simply cannot solve with current knowledge and investigative techniques. The campsite evidence sits in our forensics laboratory, each item carefully catalogued and stored according to standard protocols. But standard protocols seem inadequate for evidence that defies the laws of physics. How do you store a wedding ring that retains heat without any apparent heat source? How do you preserve coffee grounds that show no signs of aging after 8 years of mountain exposure? How do you catalogue photographic equipment that functions perfectly despite environmental conditions that should have destroyed it years ago? Sometimes I find myself standing in the evidence room, staring at Emma's wedding ring and trying to comprehend the warmth that still radiates from the metal. The sensation is both comforting and deeply unsettling. Comforting because it suggests some kind of ongoing connection to Emma herself. Unsettling because it violates everything we think we know about the physical world. The families have asked me to continue investigating, and I will honor that commitment for as long as I remain capable of doing so. David and Emma deserve to have their fate determined, if such a thing is possible. Their families deserve answers, even if those answers challenge our understanding of reality itself. But I have come to suspect that this case may require kinds of investigation and analysis that lie beyond the current capabilities of law enforcement or scientific research. What I do know is this: David Michael Thornton and Emma Catherine Thornton went into the mountains of Wyoming as newlyweds seeking adventure and solitude. They successfully reached their planned base camp on Mount Hooker's western face, where they spent at least one night safely and happily. They were exactly where they wanted to be, doing exactly what they loved most, with the person they loved most in the world. And then they vanished. Not gradually, not as the result of some extended ordeal or series of poor decisions, but completely and instantaneously, leaving behind only their belongings in a state of preservation that defies natural law. Whatever happened to them on that narrow granite ledge 800 feet above the Wyoming wilderness happened in a way that our current understanding of reality cannot explain or even adequately describe. The campsite still exists, though it has been thoroughly documented and most of the evidence has been removed for analysis. Sometimes I wonder if David and Emma might somehow return to that place, if whatever force or circumstance that took them might someday reverse itself and restore them to the world they left behind. The thought is both hopeful and terrifying. Hopeful because it might reunite them with the families who love them. Terrifying because it would confirm that reality operates according to rules we don't understand and cannot control. Emma's students at Boulder Elementary, now several years older, still ask about their missing teacher when Lisa visits the school. The questions have evolved as the children have grown and learned more about the complexity of the world, but the fundamental wondering remains the same. What happened to Mrs. Thornton? Where did she go? Is she ever coming back? These are the same questions that haunt everyone who has been touched by the Thornton case. They are questions that may never be answered, mysteries that may challenge our understanding of reality for generations to come. But they are also testimony to the love and connection that David and Emma created during their brief time together. Relationships so strong that their disappearance continues to reverberate through dozens of lives years after they vanished. The garden dedicated to Emma's memory at Boulder Elementary has grown into a place of quiet beauty where children learn about plants, ecosystems, and the natural cycles that govern life and death. But the garden also serves as a reminder that some mysteries resist our best efforts to solve them, that some questions persist despite our desperate need for answers. Lisa Thornton continues her annual pilgrimages to the Wind River Range. Though the discovery of the campsite has changed the focus of her searches, she no longer looks for Emma and David themselves, having accepted that they may be beyond finding through conventional means. Instead, she goes to the mountains to maintain her connection to her sister, to honor Emma's memory in the places where Emma was happiest. I know she's not coming back, Lisa told me during our most recent conversation. I've accepted that. But I also know that whatever happened to her up there, she was exactly where she wanted to be when it happened. She was with David. She was in the mountains. She was living the adventure she had dreamed about. If she had to leave this world, at least she left it while doing what she loved most. The Wind River Range continues to attract climbers from around the world, people seeking the same kind of wilderness experience that drew David and Emma to Mount Hooker. Most of these adventurers are unaware of the mystery that surrounds the mountain's western face, focused instead on their own challenges and objectives. But sometimes, when conditions are right and the light falls across the granite walls in a particular way, climbers report seeing shapes and shadows that seem almost human, figures that disappear when examined more closely. These sightings are probably nothing more than optical illusions created by changing light and shadow on complex rock formations. The human eye and brain are notoriously unreliable when it comes to interpreting ambiguous visual information, especially in challenging environments like high-altitude mountain faces. But the reports persist, adding another layer of mystery to an already inexplicable case. Mount Hooker itself remains unchanged by all the human drama that has surrounded it. The mountain existed for millions of years before David and Emma arrived, and it will continue to exist long after everyone who knew them has died. Mountains operate according to geological timescales that make human concerns seem trivial and temporary. But mountains also keep secrets, holding evidence of events and processes that occurred long before human beings existed to witness them. Perhaps that's what Mount Hooker is doing with David and Emma's story, keeping their secret until some future time when humanity possesses the knowledge and understanding necessary to comprehend what happened on that narrow ledge 8 years ago. Perhaps the impossible preservation of their campsite is itself a message, a clue pointing toward realities that we are not yet prepared to acknowledge or understand. Or perhaps the mountain is simply indifferent to human concerns, and the preservation of the campsite is the result of natural processes that we haven't yet discovered or understood. Perhaps there are aspects of chemistry, physics, and biology that remain unknown to current science, phenomena that will eventually be explained through research and investigation that hasn't yet been conducted. But until that knowledge is gained, until those discoveries are made, the Thornton case remains one of the most baffling mysteries in the history of American law enforcement. It challenges our understanding of what is possible and impossible in the natural world. It forces us to confront the limits of our knowledge and the possibility that reality operates according to rules we haven't yet learned. The case file sits in my office, officially open but effectively dormant until new evidence emerges or new investigative techniques become available. Sometimes I review the photographs from the campsite, studying Emma's final smile and David's careful composition, trying to find some clue that might explain what happened next. But the images reveal only happiness and anticipation, two people completely unaware that they were about to become central figures in one of the most inexplicable mysteries of our time. What haunts me most about the Thornton case is not just the disappearance itself, but the implications of what we found. If two people can vanish completely while their belongings remain perfectly preserved in violation of natural law, what does that tell us about the nature of reality itself? What other assumptions about the physical world might be incorrect? What other mysteries might be waiting in the wilderness, hidden until chance and circumstance conspire to reveal them? The families continue to hope for resolution, though that hope has evolved and matured over the years since David and Emma's disappearance. They no longer expect to welcome their loved ones home alive, but they still hope for understanding, for some explanation that might provide closure and peace. They deserve that understanding, even if it comes in forms that challenge everything we think we know about the world. I will continue investigating this case for as long as I am able, following any leads that emerge and exploring any theories that might provide insight into what happened on Mount Hooker 8 years ago. But I have come to suspect that the Thornton case may ultimately require kinds of investigation that go beyond traditional law enforcement techniques, analysis that draws on disciplines and knowledge that don't yet exist. Until then, the mystery endures. David and Emma Thornton remain missing, their fate unknown and perhaps unknowable according to current human understanding. Their campsite exists in evidence storage, each item catalogued and preserved, a collection of impossible artifacts that testify to events that should not be possible according to the laws of physics and chemistry. And somewhere in the vast wilderness of Wyoming's Wind River Range, Mount Hooker keeps its secrets, holding knowledge that might explain one of the most baffling disappearances in American history. The mountain has been keeping secrets for millions of years, storing evidence of geological processes and evolutionary changes that occurred long before human beings existed to witness them. Perhaps one day, when humanity possesses greater knowledge and understanding, Mount Hooker will reveal what happened to David and Emma Thornton on that narrow granite ledge 8 years ago. Perhaps future investigators, armed with techniques and technologies we cannot yet imagine, will solve the mystery that has baffled everyone who has encountered it. But until that day comes, the case remains open, the questions remain unanswered, and the families remain haunted by the knowledge that their loved ones vanished in a way that defies rational explanation. The Thornton case stands as a reminder that there are still mysteries in our world, still questions that resist our best efforts to answer them, still aspects of reality that remain beyond our current understanding. David and Emma went into the mountains seeking adventure and found something far stranger than they ever could have imagined. They became part of a mystery that challenges our fundamental assumptions about what is possible and impossible in the natural world. Their love story became a tale of the unexplained, their honeymoon adventure transformed into one of the most baffling cases in the history of missing persons investigations. The warm wedding rings still sit in our evidence room, radiating heat that should not exist, defying the laws of thermodynamics in ways that no scientist can explain. Sometimes I hold those rings and wonder if they retain some connection to David and Emma themselves, some link to wherever they have gone or whatever they have become. The sensation is both comforting and deeply unsettling, a reminder that there are aspects of reality that remain beyond our comprehension. What happened to David Michael Thornton and Emma Catherine Thornton on Mount Hooker's western face remains one of the most profound mysteries of our time. It challenges our understanding of physics, chemistry, biology, and the fundamental nature of reality itself. It forces us to confront the possibility that there are forces and phenomena in our world that operate according to rules we have not yet discovered or understood. Their story continues to inspire questions that may never be answered, mysteries that may persist long after everyone who knew them has died. But their story also testifies to the power of love and the human desire for adventure, the willingness to venture into unknown places in search of experiences that reveal fundamental truths about life and connection. In the end, perhaps, that is the most important legacy of David and Emma Thornton, not the mystery of their disappearance, but the example of their love and their courage in pursuing the adventures that gave their lives meaning and joy. They remind us that some experiences are worth any risk, that some connections transcend our understanding of what is possible, and that love itself may be the greatest mystery of all. What do you think really happened to David and Emma Thornton on Mount Hooker? Was their disappearance the result of natural forces we don't yet understand, or something far stranger that challenges our entire understanding of reality? The warm wedding rings, the impossibly preserved campsite, the 8-year gap between disappearance and discovery. What could explain evidence that seems to violate the laws of physics themselves? Leave your theories in the comments below.